Why do I suddenly speak French? The French tourists next to me on the subway were arguing, and somehow I understood every word even though I'd never studied French in my entire life. The woman was complaining about her mother-in-law's cooking, and 30 seconds ago this would have been complete gibberish. "Excuse me," I said to them in perfect French that I was shocked to feel coming out of my mouth. "Are you speaking French?" They stared at me, and the woman asked where I was from. I opened my mouth to say I didn't speak French, but what came out was lion, in an accent so authentic she started asking about specific neighborhoods. I grabbed my bag and pushed through the doors just as they closed. Standing on the platform, my hands were shaking as I pulled up a French news site. Every word made sense, including idioms I shouldn't know existed. I called my mom. "Did we ever live in France? Did I take French as a kid?" I asked. "What?" "No, honey. Why would you think that?" she said. "You know we've never even left the country." I hung up and went home where Claire was watching TV with subtitles. She was in her 4th year of French and always had homework spread everywhere. I picked up her textbook and read a passage out loud. "Wait, what are you doing?" Claire asked, muting the TV. "You don't speak French." "I do now," I said in French. "That's not possible," she said. "Say something else." I recited a poem I'd never heard before about autumn leaves and death. It just came out like it had always been in my head. Claire grabbed her laptop and pulled up a video of someone speaking rapid Quebec French, which was supposed to be incomprehensible even to some French speakers. "What are they saying?" she asked. I translated every word, including the slang. Claire stood up and backed away from me. "We're going to the hospital," she said. The emergency room doctor didn't believe us until I translated the French labels on every piece of equipment in the room. He ordered brain scans and blood work and kept asking about head trauma. When everything came back normal, he called in another doctor who spoke French and had me converse with her for 20 minutes about medical terminology I shouldn't understand. "Has anything unusual happened recently?" she asked. "Any new medications or experiences?" "Just that psychology study at school 3 days ago, but that was about memory," I said. "What kind of study?" she asked. "They paid $200 to wear headphones and look at cards for 2 hours. It was supposed to be about pattern recognition." The doctors exchanged looks, and the French one asked to see any paperwork I had. I found the crumpled consent form in my bag and handed it over. She read it and frowned. "This isn't from the university," she said. "The Berger Institute isn't affiliated with your school." "But it was in the psychology building," I said. "We should call the university," she said. While she made calls, I Googled the Berger Institute on my phone. One archived webpage from 2010 mentioned experimental language education. Nothing else existed. The business card the researcher had given me now went to a pizza place. The doctor came back looking concerned. "The university has no record of any study," she said. "The room you described is a regular classroom. They're sending campus security to check it out." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking in French without meaning to, and when I did drift off, I dreamed in French about places I'd never been. At 3 a.m., I gave up and went deep into internet archives looking for anything about the Berger Institute or BL Research Associates, which had paid me. I found a lawsuit from 15 years ago. A company called BL Research had been sued for conducting unauthorized experiments on college students. They'd been testing accelerated learning, but the details were sealed. 3 students claimed they'd suddenly understood languages they'd never studied. The court had dismissed them as delusional, but attached to one filing was a medical report someone had failed to redact properly. Brain scans showed unusual activity in the language center. The doctor's note said the patterns matched someone who'd learned a second language before age 5. The students swore they'd only ever spoken English. I went back to the psychology building the next morning. The room where I'd done the study was definitely just a classroom now, but something felt wrong about it. I stood in the doorway trying to remember exactly what had happened during those 2 hours. "Can I help you?" a janitor asked from down the hall. "Were there any researchers here 3 days ago?" I asked. "Researchers?" "No, but there was a work crew in that room doing something with the electrical," he said. "They had a ton of equipment." "What kind of equipment?" "Speakers and computers and these weird helmets with wires," he said. "Said they were testing the acoustics for the university, but they didn't have the right work orders. I reported it, but nobody seemed to care." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking or the French goes away." I texted back, "Who is this?" "We gave you a gift. Don't make us take it back." "How did you do this?" "Check your bank account." I opened my banking app. The $200 deposit from BL Research had been reversed. But there was a new deposit for $2,000 from something called Linguistic Solutions International. The memo line said, "Compensation for Phase 1." Another text arrived. The message read, "Phase 2 begins Monday. Higher compensation. Enhanced results. Reply yes to confirm participation." I stared at those words and felt like I might throw up, because they actually thought I'd volunteer for more of whatever they did to me. The $2,000 sitting in my account felt dirty now, like they'd paid me to be their experiment without asking if I wanted to keep going. I knew if I spent that money or kept it too long, they'd use it as proof I agreed to be part of their research program. My hands were shaking as I opened my phone's screenshot function and started capturing everything. I took pictures of the text messages, the bank deposits, the reversal of the original payment, and the new deposit from Linguistic Solutions. Claire had told me about a case in her computer science ethics class where a company deleted evidence from someone's phone remotely, so I knew I needed backups of everything before these people found a way to make it all disappear. I documented every timestamp, every phone number, every detail I could think of because this might be the only proof I'd have later that any of this actually happened. My fingers kept slipping on the screen because my hands wouldn't stop shaking, but I forced myself to slow down and make sure each screenshot was clear and readable. I emailed the screenshots to myself, then forwarded them to a backup email account I barely used, then uploaded them to 3 different cloud storage services. After that, I printed everything on our cheap printer that always jammed, standing there watching page after page come out with evidence that someone had messed with my brain and now wanted to do it again. The front door opened while I was spreading printouts across our kitchen table, organizing them by date and trying to figure out what order made the most sense. Claire walked in carrying her backpack and a coffee, took one look at the papers covering every surface, and asked what was going on. I showed her my phone with the new text about Phase 2 and the bank statement showing the $2,000 deposit. Her coffee cup hit the table hard enough that some splashed out. She picked up the consent form I'd signed and read it again, then looked at the text messages, then back at me. She said we needed to report this to someone official right now, not just collect evidence and hope it would matter later. I told her I didn't know who to report it to because the police already knew about the unauthorized study from the hospital visit, and campus security was investigating the fake work order, but nobody seemed to be doing anything that would actually stop these people. Claire grabbed her laptop and started searching for university departments that handled research problems. She found something called the University Research Compliance Office that was supposed to review all studies involving students and make sure they followed proper rules. The office had a website with a form for reporting concerns about research ethics, and Claire said this was exactly the kind of thing they were supposed to handle. We spent the next 2 hours drafting an email that explained everything in the right order, so it would make sense to someone who hadn't lived through it. I attached the consent form, the screenshots of the text messages, my bank statements showing both deposits and the medical reports from the hospital that confirmed I could suddenly speak French. Claire helped me organize the attachments and write a clear timeline of events starting from the fake psychology study 3 days ago. I read the email out loud twice to make sure it didn't sound crazy or paranoid, then added one more paragraph about the Phase 2 recruitment text I'd received today. At 4:47 p.m., I hit send and watched the email disappear into the compliance office inbox. Claire squeezed my hand and said someone would probably respond within a few days, and at least now there was an official record of what happened. My phone buzzed at 5:52 p.m. with an email from Simona Marsh, the research compliance officer. She said my report raised serious concerns about unauthorized research and asked if I could meet first thing tomorrow morning to discuss the situation in detail. The fact that she responded in barely an hour made me feel like maybe this was actually serious enough that someone with authority would pay attention instead of dismissing it as a weird student complaint. I emailed back confirming I could meet at 8 a.m. and asking if Claire could come with me. Simona replied within 10 minutes saying Claire was welcome to attend as support. That night I lay in bed trying to sleep, but my brain wouldn't shut off. French words kept appearing in my thoughts without me choosing them, like someone else was thinking through my head. When I finally dozed off around 2 a.m., I dreamed about walking through narrow streets in a city I'd never seen, understanding conversations happening in cafes and shops, knowing the names of buildings and neighborhoods that shouldn't mean anything to me. The dreams felt more like memories than imagination, as if the language they'd put in my brain came with pieces of someone else's life attached to it. I woke up at 6 a.m. feeling exhausted and scared because the French wasn't going away. It was getting stronger and more present every day. Claire and I got to Simona's office at 10 minutes before 8 and waited in uncomfortable chairs outside her door. Simona turned out to be younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with short dark hair and glasses that she kept adjusting while she talked. She invited us into her office and immediately started taking notes on a yellow legal pad, writing down every detail I could remember about the study. She asked specific questions about the equipment I'd seen, the exact room number in the psychology building, what the researchers looked like, and what happened during those 2 hours wearing the headphones. I told her about the cards they'd shown me and the weird humming sound that came through the headphones and how I'd felt dizzy and strange by the end, but figured it was just boring research work. Simona wrote everything down and said she'd need to interview the janitor who reported the unauthorized equipment to get his description of what he saw. She explained that conducting research on human subjects without proper university approval was a serious federal violation that could cost the school millions in research funding. She opened an official investigation right there during our meeting, filling out forms on her computer and assigning the case a tracking number. I asked if the university had any way to reverse what they did to me, to make the French go away so my brain could go back to normal. Simona stopped typing and looked at me for a long moment before saying that neurological changes like this might be permanent. She explained that if they'd actually altered my brain structure or created new neural pathways, there might not be a way to undo it without risking damage to other cognitive functions. The weight of that possibility hit me hard, because I'd been hoping someone would figure out how to fix this. But now I might be stuck understanding French for the rest of my life, because of 2 hours in a classroom with fake researchers. Simona must have seen something in my face because she said the university would cover any medical monitoring I needed and help me access specialists who might understand what happened. She advised me to start documenting any side effects or changes I noticed, keeping a detailed journal of headaches, sleep problems, intrusive French thoughts, anything that felt different from before the study. I nodded and said I'd start tracking everything, even though writing it all down felt like admitting this was real and permanent and not something that would just go away on its own. Simona printed out a copy of her initial investigation report and gave it to me, saying I should keep my own records of everything that happened from this point forward. I walked back to my apartment in a daze, clutching the printed investigation report like it might disappear if I let go. Claire was home early from her lab section and took one look at my face before asking what happened. I told her about Simona confirming the changes might be permanent, about documenting everything in a journal, about how the university was investigating but couldn't fix what those people did to my brain. She listened quietly and then pulled out her laptop. Claire found a legal aid clinic that worked with students and showed me their website listing attorneys who handled different cases. One name stood out because her profile mentioned research ethics and consumer protection. Ananya Banks specialized in cases where companies exploited people who didn't understand what they were agreeing to. I drafted an email explaining the unauthorized study, the threatening texts, the bank deposits, and asked if she could advise me on what rights I had. My hands shook as I typed because getting a lawyer made this feel more serious and more real than just talking to campus compliance. I hit send and immediately worried I'd said too much or not enough or sounded crazy describing how I suddenly understood French. Claire ordered pizza, and we tried to watch a movie, but I kept checking my phone every few minutes. Around 4 that afternoon, my phone rang from an unknown number, and I almost didn't answer. A woman's voice asked if I was the person who emailed about unauthorized research, and I confirmed it was me. Ananya introduced herself and said she'd read my email twice because the details were disturbing. She asked me to explain everything from the beginning without leaving anything out. I recounted the subway conversation with the tourists, the hospital visit, finding the old lawsuit, the threatening texts, all of it. Ananya listened without interrupting once, which felt strange because most people jumped in with questions or skepticism. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before saying, this case involved potential criminal violations that went way beyond research ethics problems. She explained that conducting unauthorized experiments on people, especially ones that caused permanent neurological changes, could be assault or battery under criminal law. The threatening texts added harassment and possibly extortion to the list. She agreed to represent me without charging anything because she was passionate about protecting people from corporate exploitation, especially when companies targeted students who had fewer resources to fight back. I felt tears starting because someone finally believed me and wanted to help. Ananya said her first priority was stopping any further contact from these people and making sure they couldn't do this to other students. She asked me to forward every text message, email, and document I had and told me not to respond to any more messages from unknown numbers. I thanked her and promised to send everything as soon as we hung up. The next morning, Ananya texted asking me to come to her office downtown because we needed to discuss next steps. I took the bus and found her small office above a coffee shop, walls covered with case files and law books stacked on every surface. She had printed out all the documentation I'd sent and organized it into folders with colored tabs. We were reviewing the timeline when my phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. I showed it to Ananya, and her expression hardened as she read the message offering Phase 2 with enhanced cognitive benefits and $5,000 compensation. The text promised location details would follow soon. Ananya immediately told me to forward the message to her and stop responding to anything these people sent. She explained they were escalating their approach, moving from threats about taking away the French to offers of more money and more experiments. This pattern suggested they were either desperate to continue their research or worried about what I might do with the information I'd gathered. Ananya said we needed to file a police report about the threats and harassment, even though campus security already knew about the unauthorized study. Having an official police report would create a paper trail that could be used later if this went to court. She grabbed her bag and walked me to the police station 6 blocks away, coaching me on what to say and what details to emphasize. At the station, she asked for a detective who handled technology crimes, and we waited in a small room with uncomfortable plastic chairs. The detective who finally came in looked younger than I expected and took notes on a tablet while I explained everything again. He asked specific questions about the text messages, when they started, what they said, whether I'd responded. I showed him my phone and he took screenshots of every message. Ananya provided copies of all my documentation, including the consent form, the bank statements showing the reversed payment and new deposit, and Simona's initial investigation report. The detective said he would start investigating Linguistic Solutions International and their connection to the old BL research company from the lawsuit. He warned us that corporate shell companies were specifically designed to hide accountability, and this investigation might take weeks or even months to trace the real people behind the fake business names. He gave me a case number and his direct contact information, telling me to call immediately if I received any more threats, or if anyone tried to contact me in person. Walking back to Ananya's office, I felt both relieved and frustrated because having a police investigation meant someone was taking this seriously, but waiting weeks for answers felt impossible. I tried to focus on my classes over the next few days, but every French word I overheard jumped out at me with perfect clarity. In my Spanish class, the professor asked a question about verb conjugation, and I opened my mouth to answer, but what came out was French instead of Spanish. The whole class laughed, and the professor looked confused, asking me to repeat my answer in the correct language. I felt my face burning as I stammered out the Spanish version, but the damage was done and people kept glancing at me for the rest of the period. After class, I sat in my car feeling like I was losing control of my own brain, like the French was taking over and pushing out everything else. Claire found me there an hour later and suggested I talk to a student reporter she knew who investigated campus issues. She thought getting the story out publicly might pressure the university and the companies to take responsibility. That evening, I met Sid Forrest at a coffee shop near campus, and he already had a notebook open before I even sat down. Sid explained he'd heard rumors about unauthorized studies happening in campus buildings, but hadn't been able to verify anything concrete. I told him everything, and he started asking questions about the companies involved, writing down names and dates. He pulled out his laptop and showed me how to search corporate registration databases that listed when companies were formed and who registered them. Together, we discovered that Linguistic Solutions International had been registered just 3 months ago, with only a P.O. box address listed. The company had no website, no employees listed anywhere, no business history beyond the basic registration paperwork. Sid explained this was a huge red flag because legitimate research companies had established presences with staff directories and published studies. We kept digging through public records and traced the corporate registration back to a law firm that specialized in creating shell companies for research organizations. Sid pulled up the law firm's website and showed me their services page, which explicitly advertised helping clients structure businesses to minimize liability exposure. He explained this was a common tactic when companies expected their experiments might go wrong and wanted to avoid being sued directly. The law firm would create multiple shell companies with no real assets, so even if someone won a lawsuit, they couldn't collect any money because the company was just a legal fiction. My phone buzzed with an email from Simona, and I opened it right there at the coffee shop. She'd found the falsified work order that gave the researchers access to the psychology building on the day of my study. The work order claimed they were testing acoustic equipment for the university, but it was signed by someone who didn't actually work in facilities management. Simona had verified that the signature was forged, and the person whose name appeared on the form had never authorized any work in that building. She was forwarding everything to the university police and recommending they pursue charges for trespassing and fraud. I showed the email to Sid, and he immediately asked if he could quote it in an article he was writing about unauthorized research on campus. I told him to check with Simona first, but that I wanted this story public, so other students would know to be careful. Ananya called me 2 days later and said she'd finished drafting the formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office. She walked me through every section over the phone, explaining how she documented the unauthorized experiments, the corporate fraud through shell companies, and the threatening messages that followed. The complaint named BL Research, Linguistic Solutions International, and the law firm that registered both entities as defendants in a pattern of illegal human experimentation. She filed it electronically that afternoon and forwarded me the confirmation email showing the case number and assigned investigator. The Attorney General's office had 60 days to respond, but Ananya explained that filing created an official record that would pressure the companies to respond through proper legal channels instead of anonymous texts. I felt relieved knowing this was now on record with actual authorities who could investigate beyond what Simona and the university police could do. That night I was making dinner when my phone buzzed with another unknown number. The text said they wanted to schedule a consultation about Phase 2 opportunities at a hotel conference room downtown this Friday at 7 p.m. The message included specific benefits like enhanced memory, faster processing speed, and compensation of $5,000 for participation. My hands started shaking as I read it because they were trying to get me back for more experiments after everything that had happened. I immediately forwarded the text to Ananya, and she called me within 5 minutes. She told me to ignore it completely and not respond in any way, then said she was forwarding it to the detective investigating the harassment charges. Ananya explained that this invitation could be considered witness tampering since I'd filed complaints with multiple agencies, and the detective might be able to trace the meeting location to find whoever was organizing these studies. I saved the text as evidence but felt sick knowing they were still actively recruiting people for more brain experiments. Claire got home an hour later and I showed her the Phase 2 invitation, expecting her to be as angry as I was. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table and asked if I'd considered just taking the money and stopping all the investigating. I stared at her in shock, because I couldn't believe she was suggesting I participate in more unauthorized experiments after what they'd already done to me. She said she was worried about my safety and thought I was becoming too focused on finding answers instead of moving forward with my life. I told her I couldn't let this go and they might do this to other students who wouldn't know to question a fake psychology study. We started arguing about whether I was being responsible or obsessed, and Claire said I was prioritizing strangers over our relationship and my own well-being. I got angry and said she didn't understand what it felt like to have someone mess with your brain without permission, and she shot back that I was using the French as an excuse to avoid dealing with normal life stress. The fight escalated until Claire grabbed her bag and left to stay at her friend's apartment, slamming the door behind her. I sat alone in our kitchen feeling terrible because I knew she was scared, but I also couldn't just pretend this wasn't happening to other people. 3 hours later, Claire texted asking if we could talk, and I called her immediately. She apologized for suggesting I should just take money and ignore what happened, explaining she was scared about what might happen if I kept pushing against people who clearly had resources and connections to threaten me. I told her I understood she was worried, but I needed to see this through to protect other students from being experimented on without real consent. Claire said she would support me, but asked me to promise I'd be careful and not take unnecessary risks like meeting anyone connected to the companies. We talked for another hour about boundaries and how to handle the stress this was causing, and she came home that night. We ordered takeout and watched TV without discussing the case, just being together and remembering we were on the same team. The next morning, Sid texted me saying he'd found something important and could I meet him at the library. I got there 20 minutes later and found him in a study room with his laptop open to a university forum post from last semester. The post was from an anonymous student asking if anyone else had participated in a language study that seemed suspicious, and several replies mentioned similar experiences with sudden language abilities. Sid had tracked down one of the students through their posting history, and the student had agreed to talk to me privately about what happened. The student wanted to remain anonymous because he'd signed a settlement agreement, but he was willing to share information that might help my case. Sid gave me the student's encrypted email address, and I sent a message that afternoon asking if we could meet somewhere private on campus. He responded within an hour, suggesting a study room in the engineering building where fewer people would recognize us. I met him the next day in a small windowless room on the 3rd floor, and he was clearly nervous as he checked the hallway before closing the door. He told me he'd participated in what was advertised as a cognitive enhancement study last semester and woke up the next day understanding Mandarin perfectly, despite never studying it. He experienced the same threatening texts when he started asking questions, and eventually the company offered him $15,000 to sign an agreement, saying he wouldn't discuss the study or seek medical treatment without their approval. He took the settlement because he was scared and needed money for tuition, but he regretted it because he knew they were doing this to other students. Hearing his identical experience made me feel less crazy, but more angry because this proved they'd been running these experiments for months at minimum. He showed me his settlement paperwork with all the identifying information blacked out, and I took photos of the legal language that matched what Kensington had tried to offer me. The student said he still had Mandarin fluency 8 months later and sometimes dreamed in Chinese, which confirmed my fear that these changes might be permanent. I thanked him for meeting with me and promised I wouldn't reveal his identity, then immediately sent the photos to Ananya and Simona. 2 days later, Sid forwarded me an email from someone named Reese Chang, who worked as a forensic IT contractor. Reese had read Sid's article about unauthorized research and wanted to offer free technical help tracing the text messages and payment sources. Reese explained he was building a portfolio of cases involving corporate technology abuse and wanted to expose companies that used sophisticated tech to hide illegal activities. I called Reese that evening, and he walked me through what kind of phone records and bank statements he'd need to analyze the threatening messages and financial transactions. I sent him everything I had permission to share, and he said he'd start working on it immediately. 3 days later, Reese sent me a detailed report showing the threatening texts came from spoofed numbers that routed through multiple servers in different countries to hide their origin. He explained this level of technical setup required serious resources and expertise, meaning we were dealing with people who had money and skills to cover their tracks professionally. The report included diagrams showing how the messages bounced through servers in Romania, Singapore, and Canada before reaching my phone, making it nearly impossible to trace back to the actual sender without cooperation from multiple international service providers. Reese said the payment sources were similarly hidden through layers of shell companies and offshore accounts designed to prevent anyone from finding the real people controlling the money. I forwarded his report to the detective and Ananya, feeling overwhelmed by how sophisticated this operation was compared to what I'd initially thought was just a sketchy campus study. Simona emailed me the following week saying she'd arranged a meeting with the university's legal counsel to discuss institutional liability and student protection policies. She invited me to attend and present my evidence, which made me nervous because I'd be talking to lawyers who might be more concerned about protecting the university than helping students. The meeting was scheduled for the next Monday in the administration building, and Simona said to bring all my documentation, including the consent form, text messages, medical records, and the reports from Reese. I spent the weekend organizing everything into a clear timeline with supporting documents. practicing how to explain what happened without getting emotional or confused. Claire helped me rehearse answers to questions the lawyers might ask, and she offered to come with me for support, but I told her Simona would be there, and I needed to do this myself. Monday morning, I met Simona outside the legal counsel's office, and we went in together to a conference room where 3 university lawyers were waiting. The head counsel introduced herself and the others, then asked me to walk through exactly what happened from the moment I saw the study flyer to the present day. I explained how the study was advertised on campus bulletin boards as psychology research about pattern recognition, how the consent form mentioned memory testing, but nothing about language or neurostimulation, and how I wore headphones and looked at cards for 2 hours in what I thought was a legitimate university study. The lawyers took detailed notes and asked specific questions about what information I was given before signing the consent form. I showed them the actual form, which clearly stated the study was about pattern recognition and memory, with no mention of language implantation, brain stimulation, or any neurological procedures. One lawyer asked if anyone verified I was participating in a real university study, and I explained that it was in the psychology building during normal hours with official-looking paperwork, so I had no reason to question its legitimacy. The head counsel asked what I expected the university to do now, and I said I wanted them to prevent this from happening to other students by requiring all research to be verified through a central system before recruitment could happen on campus. She nodded and made notes. Then the head lawyer leaned forward and explained something that surprised me. The university could face serious liability for allowing unauthorized researchers on campus, even though they had no idea the study was fake. Federal regulations about human research are strict, and if it came out that the university failed to prevent this, they could lose research funding or face lawsuits from other affected students. This meant the university had a real motivation to help me investigate and stop these companies from doing it again, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because their own interests were at stake. The lawyers asked what evidence I still needed, and I mentioned wanting to see who actually reserved that classroom and when the equipment was brought in. One lawyer said I could submit a public records request for building access logs and room reservations, which would be harder for anyone to hide or delete. After the meeting ended, Simona walked me out and said she would push the facilities department to respond quickly to any request I submitted. I texted Ananya about the records request idea, and she replied within minutes saying she could help me word it properly to make sure the university provided everything without delays or excuses. We met at her office that afternoon, and she pulled up templates for public records requests on her computer. She explained that the key was being specific about exactly what documents I wanted, while also being broad enough that they couldn't claim something didn't fit the request. We spent an hour crafting the language, asking for all room reservation logs for the psychology building during the week of my study, all building access records showing who entered, and when, any work orders or equipment delivery logs, and all correspondence about room usage or equipment setup. Ananya helped me submit it through the university's official portal with a copy sent to Simona so she could track it internally. The system said I should get a response within 10 business days, which felt like forever, but Ananya assured me that was actually pretty fast for public records. 2 days later, I was checking my email between classes when a message arrived from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Former BL research employee," and my first instinct was to delete it as spam or another threat. But I opened it carefully, and the message claimed to be from someone who used to work for BL Research and wanted to help expose what the company had been doing to students. The email included technical details about something called acoustic priming combined with transcranial magnetic stimulation, which supposedly allowed rapid language learning by making the brain think it learned the language as a child. The writer said they felt guilty about participating in unauthorized experiments and wanted to help me build a case against the company. I took screenshots of the email immediately and forwarded it to Ananya with a message asking if this could be real or if it was a trap. She called me 10 minutes later and told me to be extremely careful about trusting anyone connected to these companies. We agreed to meet in person to discuss how to handle this, and I spent the rest of the day wondering if the anonymous source was genuine or if the companies were trying to trick me into revealing my strategy. That evening, I met Ananya at a coffee shop off campus, and she brought her laptop to analyze the email headers and metadata. She explained that anonymous sources could be valuable but also dangerous, especially when dealing with companies that had already shown they were willing to threaten and manipulate people. We talked through different scenarios, from the source being completely legitimate to it being a corporate lawyer trying to gather information about my case. Ananya advised that we should only communicate through encrypted email and verify every piece of information independently before trusting it or acting on it. She helped me set up a secure email account and draft a careful response to the anonymous source asking for more specific information that we could verify without revealing anything about my own evidence or plans. The next morning, I woke up to another email from the anonymous source, and this time he identified himself as Stephen Herring. He sent attached files including scanned documents that showed BL Research had been running unauthorized language studies for over 10 years at different universities. The documents included consent forms that looked almost exactly like mine, with the same misleading language about pattern recognition and memory testing. There were also medical reports about subjects who experienced permanent brain changes after the experiments, with doctors' notes describing unusual activity in language centers that matched what my own scans had shown. I downloaded everything to an encrypted drive like Ananya had taught me, then spent 2 hours reading through the materials. Stephen's documentation showed at least 15 other students who had gone through similar experiences, suddenly understanding languages they had never studied after participating in what they thought were legitimate psychology research projects. Some of the medical reports were from 5 or 6 years ago, which meant this had been going on much longer than I realized. The consent forms all came from different fake organizations, with names like the Berger Institute, Cognitive Research Associates, and Language Learning Initiative. But the paperwork format and misleading descriptions were basically identical across all of them. I felt sick reading about other students who had experienced the same confusion and fear I was going through, knowing that the companies had been doing this over and over while hiding behind shell corporations and falsified credentials. Stephen sent another email a few hours later with more technical details about how the technology actually worked. He explained that they used specific sound frequencies played through the headphones to make the brain more receptive to new information, kind of like putting it in a learning mode similar to early childhood. Then they used magnetic stimulation through the equipment in those helmets to implant language patterns directly into the brain's language center, making it think these were memories from childhood rather than something new. The whole process took about 2 hours, which matched exactly how long I had sat in that classroom wearing headphones and looking at cards. Stephen also warned me that the companies were developing what they called a reversal session that could supposedly remove the implanted language, but he said it carried serious risks of disrupting other memories or causing broader brain damage. He strongly advised against participating in any reversal procedure and said the safest option was to just keep the language ability and learn to live with it. Reading his explanation made the whole thing feel more real and more scary, because it meant what they did to my brain was permanent, and there was no safe way to undo it. I forwarded all of Stephen's emails and documents to both Simona and Ananya, explaining that this could be crucial evidence if we could verify it was real. Simona responded first, saying the documentation looked consistent with what she had found in her own investigation, and that she wanted to have the university's legal team review it. Ananya was more cautious, pointing out that we needed to confirm the documents weren't recently created or altered before we could rely on them in any legal proceedings. She suggested we needed someone with technical expertise to analyze the files and verify their authenticity. That's when Reese Chang contacted me through Sid, the student reporter who had been helping me research the companies. Reese was a forensic IT contractor who specialized in analyzing digital evidence, and he offered to examine Stephen's files for free because he was building a portfolio of cases involving corporate technology abuse. I sent Reese the documents through a secure file transfer, and he started analyzing the metadata and file properties to determine if they were genuine. Reese got back to me 2 days later with a detailed report about his findings. He confirmed that the documents appeared completely authentic based on their metadata, file creation dates, and digital signatures that spanned several years. The medical reports had been created on different computer systems at different times, which would be almost impossible to fake convincingly. The consent forms showed printer codes and paper aging consistent with documents that were actually printed years ago, rather than recently created and artificially aged. Reese explained that while it was theoretically possible someone could forge all of this, the level of technical sophistication required made it extremely unlikely, especially since the documents came from someone who claimed to have direct access to BL Research's files. His verification made Stephen's information credible and suggested the companies had been conducting these unauthorized experiments on students across multiple universities for at least a decade. I felt a weird mix of relief that we had solid evidence and anger that this had been happening to so many people for so long without anyone stopping it. Simona emailed me with an update about the building access logs I had requested through the public records system. She received the complete records from facilities management and discovered something important in the security data. Equipment carts had been wheeled into the psychology building at 6 a.m. on the day of my study, hours before the building normally opened for classes. The delivery logs showed 2 large carts of electronics and medical equipment signed in by people who claimed to be from the university's audiovisual department. But when Simona checked with that department, they had no record of any equipment delivery or setup that day. Campus security footage from that morning showed 2 people in lab coats pushing the carts into the building and setting up equipment in the classroom, but their faces weren't clearly visible because they wore surgical masks and kept their heads down. The footage showed them working for about 90 minutes to set up speakers, computers, and the helmets with wires that the janitor had described, then leaving the building just before classes started. Simona said this was clear evidence that unauthorized researchers had deliberately infiltrated campus facilities using false credentials and deceptive practices. The university issued a campus-wide warning 2 days after Simona shared the security footage with the administration. The email went to every student and faculty member, advising them about unauthorized research studies and explaining how to verify that any study participation was legitimate through the official Research Compliance Office. The message described the equipment setup we had discovered and warned students to be suspicious of any study that involved unusual equipment or took place in locations that seemed odd for research. It included Simona's contact information and encouraged anyone who had participated in suspicious studies to report them immediately. Reading the warning email felt like a small victory because it meant the university was finally taking this seriously and trying to protect students from being exploited the same way I had been. But it also didn't solve my personal situation or hold the companies accountable for what they had already done to me and the other students Stephen had documented. I still had perfect French comprehension that I never asked for, and the people responsible were still out there operating under different names and targeting students at other schools. The next morning, I woke up to an email from someone named Kensington Reeves at Linguistic Solutions International. The subject line said, "Partnership Discussion Request," and the tone was completely professional and formal, nothing like the threatening texts I had been getting. She wrote that she wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss resolution options and ongoing partnership opportunities, using language that made it sound like I was a valued collaborator instead of someone they had experimented on without proper consent. The shift from anonymous threats to this polished corporate communication made me immediately suspicious about what strategy they were using now. I forwarded the email to Ananya before I even got out of bed, and she called me within 20 minutes. Ananya said I should definitely meet with Kensington, but only with legal representation present, and only in a location we controlled, not somewhere they chose. We spent the call discussing what questions to ask and what information to demand, and Ananya suggested we schedule a conference call instead of an in-person meeting so she could participate directly, and we would have a recording. I replied to Kensington proposing a conference call for the following week, which would give us time to prepare our approach and coordinate with Simona about the university's position. Kensington agreed to the call within an hour, which made me think they were eager to contain this situation before it got worse for them. 3 days before the scheduled call, Ananya, Simona, and I met at Ananya's office to plan our strategy. Simona brought documentation of all the university policy violations she had found, including the falsified work orders and unauthorized building access. Ananya had prepared a list of specific legal violations to reference during the call, including fraud, unauthorized experimentation, and harassment through the threatening texts. We divided up our roles so Simona would focus on university policy issues, Ananya would address legal liability, and I would ask direct questions about what they had actually done to my brain and why. Ananya coached me on staying calm and not accepting any offers without consulting her first, even if they sounded reasonable in the moment. The conference call started exactly on time, with Kensington introducing herself and immediately trying to frame what happened as a pilot partnership program that I had voluntarily joined. She used corporate language about innovative education methods and mutual benefit, completely ignoring the fact that I had been lied to about what the study involved. Ananya cut her off and started listing the specific violations we had documented, reading from her prepared list in a calm but firm voice. She mentioned the fraud involved in using fake university credentials, the unauthorized experimentation without proper informed consent, and the harassment through threatening messages telling me to stop investigating. Kensington's tone shifted slightly, and she started talking about how there had been some communication issues, but the company wanted to make things right. She presented a settlement offer that included medical monitoring by company-approved doctors, compensation for any health effects I might experience, and participation in their official research program with proper oversight and institutional review board approval. The offer sounded reasonable at first, with promises of ongoing care and substantial financial compensation, but Ananya immediately pointed out the problem. The settlement included a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing what happened with anyone except my lawyers and doctors, which meant I could not warn other students about these unauthorized studies or talk to journalists or university officials about the risks. I felt my anger rising as I realized they wanted to buy my silence while continuing to target other students at different schools. Ananya asked Kensington directly whether Linguistic Solutions International was currently conducting similar studies at other universities, and Kensington refused to answer, citing proprietary business information. I spoke up on the call and said clearly that I was rejecting their settlement offer because I wanted accountability and protection for other students, not just personal compensation. Kensington's professional mask slipped slightly, and her voice got harder as she warned me that refusing to cooperate could mean losing access to reversal treatments if I decided I wanted the French comprehension removed from my brain. The implied threat was obvious, suggesting they had the ability to undo what they did, but would only help me if I agreed to their terms and stayed quiet about everything. Ananya ended the call shortly after that, saying we would be in touch through official legal channels, and Kensington should direct all future communication to her as my attorney. After we hung up, Ananya immediately started drafting a motion for a temporary restraining order to prevent Linguistic Solutions International from contacting me directly or conducting any research studies on university property. She explained this legal action would force them to respond in court rather than through settlement negotiations and intimidation tactics, and it would create a public record of what they had done. The judge granted a preliminary hearing for the temporary restraining order within a week, which meant we had very little time to compile all our evidence into formal legal exhibits that could be submitted to the court. Sid helped organize all the documentation we had collected, creating a timeline of events and a catalog of evidence that included the threatening texts, the falsified university paperwork, and the corporate registration information showing the shell company structure. Reese prepared technical reports explaining how the threatening text messages had been spoofed through multiple servers to hide their origin, and how the payment transfers had been routed through shell companies to obscure accountability. Stephen Herring sent another email offering to provide testimony about the company's practices and the technology they used for rapid language implantation. But he said he was afraid of retaliation since he had signed a non-disclosure agreement when he left BL Research years ago. Ananya explained that whistleblower protections might apply if he was reporting illegal activity to authorities, which could shield him from liability for breaking his NDA. She arranged for Stephen to speak with someone at the Attorney General's office to discuss his options and get formal protection before he provided any testimony. I spent the entire weekend preparing for the temporary restraining order hearing, reviewing all the evidence with Ananya, and practicing how to explain what happened to me in clear, factual terms that a judge would understand. Claire helped me stay calm by reminding me that I was fighting for other students who might be targeted by these companies, not just trying to solve my own problem. She made me take breaks to eat and sleep instead of obsessing over every detail of the case, and she listened when I needed to talk through my frustration about how these companies were still operating despite clear evidence of what they had done. Monday morning at the courthouse, I sat next to Ananya in the small hearing room while the judge reviewed our evidence binders. My hands were shaking as I watched him flip through pages of screenshots showing the threatening texts and the falsified work orders the janitor had reported. Stephen's documentation about the unauthorized experiments sat in a separate folder marked as an exhibit, and seeing it all laid out officially made everything feel more real and more scary at the same time. Kensington sat across the aisle with a lawyer in an expensive suit who kept whispering to her and taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When the judge asked Ananya to present our case, she stood up and walked him through each piece of evidence in order, explaining how the companies had used fake credentials to access university property and conduct experiments on students without proper consent or oversight. The judge listened carefully and asked several questions about the timeline and the specific threats I had received. Then Kensington's lawyer stood up and argued that I had participated voluntarily in the study and accepted payment for my time, which made this a simple contract dispute rather than anything criminal. He claimed the texts were just settlement negotiations and that reversing the original payment was standard business practice when participants backed out of research protocols. Ananya immediately countered that I couldn't consent to something when the consent form contained false information about what the study actually involved, and that threatening to remove the French language ability constituted coercion and harassment. The judge asked me directly if I had known the study involved brain stimulation or language implantation when I signed up, and I explained that the consent form only mentioned pattern recognition and memory testing with no indication of any neurological intervention. He nodded and made some notes before asking both lawyers if they had anything else to add. The judge announced he was granting a short-term restraining order that would prevent Linguistic Solutions and anyone associated with BL Research from contacting me or conducting any research activities on university property for the next 30 days, pending a full hearing. He said the evidence showed enough concern about unauthorized experimentation and potential harm to students that immediate protection was needed while the facts got sorted out properly. Relief flooded through me because having a judge officially say my concerns were real and serious made me feel like I wasn't crazy or overreacting to what had happened. Ananya squeezed my shoulder as we gathered our materials, and I could see Kensington and her lawyer having an intense whispered conversation before they left the courtroom looking frustrated. Walking out of the courthouse into the bright morning sun, I felt like I could finally breathe normally for the first time in weeks, because someone with actual authority had listened and taken action to protect me. 2 days later, Simona called to tell me that campus security had delivered formal trespass warnings to the registered addresses for both Linguistic Solutions and BL Research, officially banning anyone associated with those companies from entering university property. She explained this was the strongest action the university could take to protect students while the various investigations continued, and that security had been given photos and descriptions to watch for anyone trying to conduct unauthorized research. The trespass warnings meant that if anyone from those companies showed up on campus, they could be arrested immediately without any further process or warning. Simona sounded satisfied when she told me about it, like she was glad the university was finally taking serious steps instead of just investigating quietly. I thanked her for pushing the administration to act quickly, and she said protecting students was literally her job, even when it meant making powerful people uncomfortable with difficult questions. That same afternoon, Ananya forwarded me an email from Kensington proposing yet another revised settlement offer. This version included medical monitoring by an independent doctor without requiring the broad NDA that would have silenced me completely, but it still insisted I participate in their official research program with proper oversight and documentation. The email used careful language about wanting to ensure my health and safety while advancing important scientific knowledge about accelerated learning. Reading between the lines made me think they were way more worried about legal liability than they had let on before, especially after a judge had officially validated my concerns and issued a restraining order. The persistence bothered me because it showed they weren't going to just disappear and leave me alone, even with court orders and campus bans in place. The detective who had been investigating the threatening texts contacted me the next morning, asking to meet at a coffee shop near campus. He showed me printouts of corporate registration documents and financial transaction records spread across the table, tracing the payment sources back through a complicated network of shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada. He explained that this type of corporate structure was specifically designed to hide the actual people running these operations and make it nearly impossible to pursue legal action against individuals rather than just the company names. Each shell company owned pieces of other shell companies in a web that would take months to untangle completely, and by the time investigators tracked everything down, the companies could dissolve and reform under new names. The detective said this was typical of organizations conducting questionable research because it gave them legal protection while still allowing them to operate and recruit participants. He asked if I knew anyone else who had participated in similar studies, and I told him about the other student who had gained Mandarin, though I couldn't share his name because of the NDA he had signed. Stephen Herring sent Ananya an email that afternoon saying he was ready to provide a sworn statement about his time working at BL Research and the unauthorized experiments he had witnessed over the years. He listed specific details about the equipment they used and the techniques for rapid language implantation, including the acoustic priming and magnetic stimulation process that had apparently been used on me. Stephen's email said he understood the risks of violating his old NDA, but felt obligated to help prevent the companies from doing this to more students who had no idea what they were signing up for. Ananya immediately started arranging for Stephen to meet with someone at the Attorney General's office to discuss whistleblower protections that would shield him from legal retaliation for breaking his agreement. She explained that if Stephen was reporting illegal activity to government authorities, then his NDA couldn't be enforced against him, but he needed official protection documented before he submitted any formal testimony that the companies could use against him. Simona emailed me a week later with an invitation to attend an emergency meeting of the university's review board that handled research ethics and student protection policies. The board had decided to review the whole situation with the unauthorized studies and develop new policies to prevent anything like this from happening again on campus. Simona said the board wanted to hear directly from me about what protections or verification systems would have helped me avoid participating in the fake study, since I could provide a student perspective that the faculty members and administrators might not consider. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday afternoon in the administration building, and Simona promised it would be a serious discussion focused on practical solutions rather than just bureaucratic paperwork. At the review board meeting, I sat at a large conference table with about a dozen faculty members and administrators who all introduced themselves with titles I immediately forgot. Simona sat next to me and nodded encouragingly when the board chair asked me to explain exactly how the fake study had managed to seem so believable and official. I walked them through the whole process, starting with the flyer I had seen posted in the psychology building that looked identical to legitimate study recruitment materials. I explained how the researchers had been set up in an actual classroom in the psychology building, which made me assume they had university approval and oversight. The consent form had used official-sounding language and included an IRB approval number that I had no way to verify as fake, and the researchers wore lab coats and used professional equipment that all seemed legitimate. Several board members took notes and asked follow-up questions about what specific details had convinced me the study was real, and I could tell they were genuinely concerned about how easy it had been for outside researchers to impersonate university-approved studies. One professor suggested creating a mandatory online verification system where students could check if any study was officially registered before participating, and another proposed requiring all research recruitment to go through a central office rather than allowing individual flyers and direct contact. 3 days after the board meeting, Sid published an article in the student newspaper with the headline, "Unauthorized Research Prompts Campus Policy Review." The article carefully avoided naming me or giving identifying details, but it laid out the basic facts about fake researchers conducting experiments in university buildings without proper approval or oversight. Sid quoted Simona about the new verification systems being developed and included statements from the university administration about their commitment to student safety and research ethics. He also mentioned the restraining order and campus trespass warnings without specifying which companies were involved, keeping everything factual and documented rather than making accusations he couldn't prove. The article explained what warning signs students should watch for when considering study participation and provided contact information for the Research Compliance Office. Reading it online made me feel proud that something positive was coming from my awful experience, even if my name wasn't attached to the story. My phone started buzzing with text messages almost immediately after the article went live on the newspaper's website. Classmates I barely knew sent supportive messages saying they were glad someone was finally addressing the sketchy research recruitment that happened all over campus. Several people shared their own experiences with suspicious study invitations that had seemed too good to be true with their high payment offers and vague descriptions. Claire showed me posts in the campus discussion forums where students were sharing information about questionable studies they were invited to participate in, and multiple people said they had contacted the compliance office to report recruitment attempts that didn't seem legitimate. The public awareness spreading across campus felt like real progress toward preventing other students from ending up in my situation, even though my own problems with the French language and the companies weren't actually solved yet. Over the next 2 weeks, Ananya worked crazy hours getting everything ready for the full hearing on the restraining order. She spread out hundreds of pages of documents across her office conference table and organized them into exhibits showing the fake work orders, the threatening texts, Stephen's papers about the unauthorized experiments, and all the financial records Reese had traced. I helped her put together a timeline of everything that happened from the day I did the study until now, marking each violation and threat with dates and evidence. Stephen sent an email confirming he would testify in person about what he saw while working at the research company, which Ananya said would make our case much stronger because he could explain the technical details and prove this wasn't just happening to me. She practiced asking me questions about what I remembered from the study and how the French ability affected my daily life, making sure I could explain everything clearly without getting too emotional or confused. The preparation felt endless, but also made me feel like we were actually building something solid that the judge couldn't ignore. I spent hours reviewing my own documentation and writing out detailed descriptions of every weird thing that happened with the language, from the subway conversation to the dreams in French to the way I sometimes thought in French without meaning to. Claire helped me organize my medical records from the hospital visits and the brain scans that showed the unusual activity, and she made copies of everything in case we needed backup files. By the time the hearing date got close, Ananya had built 3 huge binders of evidence that showed exactly what these companies did and how they threatened me when I tried to find answers. 2 days before the scheduled hearing, Kensington sent a new settlement proposal through Ananya's office email. The offer included full medical coverage for any health issues related to the French ability, a big financial payment that would cover my tuition for the rest of college plus living expenses, and they dropped the requirement that I participate in any future research studies. Ananya forwarded me the proposal with a note saying the improved terms suggested they were really worried about what might come out during the hearing, especially with Stephen planning to testify about all the other students who went through similar experiments. The settlement also required the company to stop all recruitment on campus and cooperate with the state investigation, which seemed like actual accountability instead of just paying me to go away. I read through the legal language 3 times trying to understand all the conditions and exceptions, and the more I read, the more I realized this was a completely different offer than their previous attempts to shut me up. They were offering real money and real protections, not just threats about taking away the French ability or vague promises about medical monitoring. The timing made it obvious they knew Stephen's testimony would be damaging, and they wanted to avoid having all their practices exposed in a public hearing. I saved the email and sat staring at my laptop screen for probably 20 minutes, feeling torn between wanting this nightmare to be over and wanting to push forward to make sure they faced real consequences for what they did. I met with Ananya the next morning to talk about whether accepting the settlement made sense. She explained that legal cases like this could drag on for years with appeals and delays, and there was no guarantee we would win everything even with strong evidence. The settlement offered concrete benefits right now, including medical care and financial support, while going to trial meant months or years of uncertainty and stress with the possibility of losing and getting nothing. Ananya laid out both options clearly without pushing me either way, but I could tell she thought the settlement was probably the smarter choice given how these cases usually work. She pointed out that we had already forced major changes by getting the restraining order and making the university investigate, so accepting a settlement wouldn't mean we accomplished nothing. The company would still have to stop campus recruitment and cooperate with the bigger investigation, which meant other students would be protected even if the company didn't face criminal charges. I asked what would happen if we went to the full hearing, and she said we might win a bigger financial judgment, but it could take 2 or 3 years of legal battles and depositions and appeals. The uncertainty scared me because I was already exhausted from just a few weeks of this, and I couldn't imagine years more of fighting while trying to finish school and maintain my relationship with Claire. At the same time, part of me wanted to see these people held fully accountable in public, where everyone could see what they did to students like me. Ananya said I should take a day to think about it and talk to the people I trusted before making a final decision. That evening, Claire and I talked for hours about the settlement offer and what made the most sense. She pointed out that the stress of the ongoing legal situation was already affecting my health and our relationship, with me staying up late researching and getting anxious every time my phone buzzed with a new message. Claire reminded me that I had already accomplished a lot by forcing the university to change their policies and making students aware of the dangers of fake research studies. She said sometimes the practical choice was better than the perfect choice, and getting guaranteed medical care plus enough money to finish school without worrying seemed like a real win, even if it wasn't total victory. I told her I felt guilty about settling when there might be other students out there who went through the same thing. But Claire argued that the settlement terms requiring the company to stop campus recruitment and cooperate with investigators would help protect those other students too. She held my hand across our kitchen table and said she just wanted me to be healthy and happy, and watching me fight this battle for months or years would hurt both of us. Her honesty made me realize how much my obsession with finding answers and getting justice had taken over our lives, pushing aside normal couple stuff like watching movies together or talking about anything besides the lawsuit. Claire wasn't asking me to give up or let the company off easy. She was asking me to consider whether the settlement gave us enough of what we needed to move forward with our actual lives. Over the next 2 days, I called my mom and met separately with Simona and Ananya to get their perspectives on the settlement decision. My mom was mostly just worried about my safety and health, and she said the financial payment would help me finish school without student loans, which was a big deal for our family. Simona explained that the university was already implementing the policy changes we pushed for, so accepting the settlement wouldn't undo those protections for future students. Ananya walked me through the exact terms one more time and helped me understand what the limited NDA actually meant, which was that I could still discuss safety concerns with university officials and medical providers but couldn't go to the media or write about specific company practices. After talking to everyone and thinking about what mattered most, I decided to accept the settlement with some final changes to make sure it included everything I needed. I worked with Ananya to negotiate terms that included medical monitoring by an independent brain doctor who wasn't connected to the company, a specific dollar amount for the financial payment that would cover tuition, and living expenses and clear language saying the company had to end all campus recruitment permanently. The settlement also required them to cooperate fully with the state investigation, which meant they couldn't hide information or refuse to answer questions about their practices at other schools. Most importantly, the limited NDA let me talk to university officials and doctors about what happened, so if other students came forward, I could help them understand the situation without violating the agreement. After several rounds of back-and-forth negotiation, both sides agreed to the final settlement terms and scheduled a court date to make it official. The settlement hearing happened on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the original restraining order was granted. I sat next to Ananya at the plaintiff table, while Kensington and 2 lawyers from the company sat across from us, and the judge reviewed all the settlement documents we had filed. The judge asked me directly if I understood the terms and agreed to them voluntarily, and I said yes, after Ananya nodded that it was okay to answer. The judge converted the temporary restraining order into something called a consent decree, which Ananya explained meant the campus ban became permanent and enforceable by the court, instead of just being temporary. The whole hearing took less than 30 minutes, and when it was over, I felt this weird mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because I finally had guaranteed medical care and enough money to finish school without constant stress, but disappointment because part of me had wanted to see the company face bigger consequences in a public trial. Ananya reminded me that we could only control what we could control, and this settlement gave me real protections and benefits, while also forcing changes that would help other students. I signed the final papers and walked out of the courthouse with Claire, who had taken the morning off work to be there with me. The financial payment hit my bank account 2 days later, and seeing that amount of money made the whole thing feel suddenly very real and final. Stephen submitted his official statement to the state investigators a week after my settlement was finalized. Because his testimony was part of a government investigation rather than my personal lawsuit, he got formal whistleblower protections that meant the company couldn't sue him or punish him for talking about what he saw while working there. The protections also meant Stephen could speak publicly about the company's practices without violating his old employment NDA, which he started doing almost immediately through interviews with education reporters and consumer protection groups. His testimony opened up a much bigger investigation into how the company operated at colleges across the country, with investigators requesting records from at least a dozen schools where similar unauthorized studies had been reported. Stephen's information included details about the technical equipment used for the language experiments and internal emails, showing company executives knew they were violating research ethics rules. I followed the news coverage online and felt proud that my case had helped give Stephen the courage and legal protection to come forward with everything he knew. The investigation was still ongoing months later, but at least now there was official scrutiny of the company's practices, instead of just individual students trying to figure out what happened to them. The university moved fast on implementing new policies after everything that happened with my case and the settlement. They created a central database where all research studies had to be registered with verified faculty oversight before any student recruitment could happen, and they trained campus security to recognize and report suspicious research activities. Every study registration now required proof of proper approval from the Ethics Review Board and confirmation that the researchers were actually affiliated with the university or a legitimate partner institution. The compliance office sent out monthly reminders to students about how to verify study legitimacy before participating, and they posted warning signs in the psychology building and other common recruitment locations. Simona personally thanked me during a follow-up meeting in her office, saying that my willingness to come forward and document everything had made it possible to push these changes through the university administration. She said several other students had already reported suspicious recruitment attempts using the new verification system, which meant the protections were actually working to prevent future incidents. Knowing that my awful experience led to real changes that would help protect students I would never meet made the whole situation feel slightly less terrible. The policies weren't perfect and probably wouldn't catch every bad actor, but they were better than the basically non-existent protections that existed before. 3 months after the settlement was finalized, I went to my first appointment with the independent brain doctor who was part of the medical monitoring agreement. She did a full exam, including new brain scans and cognitive tests, then sat down with me to review the results. The doctor confirmed that my French understanding remained stable, without any negative health effects or signs of brain damage from whatever the company did during that study. She explained that the language ability appeared to be permanent, based on the brain activity patterns, which matched how the brain looks in people who learned a second language as young children. I asked if there was any way to remove the French, and she said attempting reversal would carry serious risks of disrupting other memories and language functions, so she strongly advised against it unless I was experiencing major problems. After thinking about it for a few days, I decided to just keep the French ability and try to make something positive out of the situation. I enrolled in an official university French course to formalize the knowledge and learn to read and write properly, instead of just understanding spoken French. Turning the unwanted experiment into an actual skill I could use and put on my resume felt like taking back some control over what happened to me. Claire and I were stronger as a couple after going through the whole crisis together, and we had learned to communicate better about stress and boundaries and supporting each other through difficult situations. I felt genuinely proud that my experience led to real changes protecting other students from similar situations, even though I wished none of it had happened in the first place. And that's my side of things. I'm curious to see yours because you always bring up angles I didn't even think of. Share your take in the comments, I'll be checking.